Hey, I'm so glad that you are here with me today for this topic. It is one that I grappled with personally. It's one that I talk with women about nearly every day, literally, but I don't talk too much about it either on my social channels or I don't think I've ever done an episode of this podcast about it. And it has to do with something that can can be a little controversial. It can be certainly very emotional, and it is almost a topic that's taboo for women, I think, who are very successful women, because I think talking about it or admitting that you struggle with it almost makes us feel vulnerable personally and professionally in a lot of ways. So let me just kind of put it out there on the table. This is the topic of depression, and it can be clinically depressed, it can be just kind of down. So I want to sort of open up the conversation by saying I'm not just talking about clinical depression. So I think that you can relate to what I'm going to share with you today, whether you've been diagnosed as in a depressive state or you just kind of have these feelings of not feeling great, feeling kind of down. You would describe it as maybe, I'm just in a slump right now, but it feels like it lasts for more than just, a few moments or sort of part of the day. I'm not talking about just like waking up in, a bad mood. I'm not talking about just oh, not feeling so great today. I'm talking about that awareness that something is off. Like I don't feel right. And it's not just this sort of, it's not a physical kind of sensation like, oh, my sinuses are bothering me or I feel a little nauseous today. It's more of like this internal not feeling well. And oftentimes it can last for days or even weeks. I certainly have struggled with this. I will fully, full disclosure here, I've struggled with this for years, off and on. And especially, I think once I got into my later 30s, early 40s, I started recognizing that it was coming on more often. I would do things like just kind of feel down, sad, to even sometimes isolating myself or pulling back from people. And then once I kind of moved forward along in years and I started recognizing, because I didn't recognize perimenopause at first, to be honest with you, but once I started moving forward and realizing like, oh, there's a hormonal component to this. I'm of the age that, yeah, you're not 30 anymore, Lori. There is something going on hormonally, and perhaps you're moving into like this perimenopause state, right? Because we didn't talk about that. Let me back up for a second. So women my age, again, most of you already know I'll be 55 here in 6-8 weeks. Women our age, we didn't get kind of the talk about menopause, right? So we didn't really know what to expect. Like, we knew there was this change, this thing, and we heard all this sort of stereotypical kind of descriptions of it and information about it, right? And a lot of that was, even in this sort of joking sense. But our generation, our moms didn't really prepare us for this. And, not to say anything derogatory about our mothers, but they weren't prepared for it. They kind of went through it blindly. Many of them not even really knowing what was going on. And so they didn't know enough about it to prepare us. If we were lucky, we got the talk about, starting our period. But in hundreds and hundreds of women who I have spoken to, every single one of them has told me, or at least none of them have told me that their mom sat them down and said, oh, let me educate you about perimenopause and menopause, what's going to start happening in your later 30s to early 40s and beyond. And so we didn't have this awareness of what is happening in our bodies. And because of that, we certainly didn't understand that this sort of emotional, kind of psychological component exists within menopause. Everyone nowadays talks about menopause in terms of the hormonal imbalance and that kind of transition, the cessation of your periods, and even, a little bit more about the physical kind of changes that we undergo. We talk about our minnow belly, our shelf belly, and the fat deposits around our middle, and a variety of other physical kinds of manifestations of what menopause does to us. We don't know everything about that. We're not educated about that, but we know way more about that than the emotional and psychological implications of this transition. And so I want to come clean about that first. And then kind of moving into, if we're already prone to these sort of depressive down states, the onset of perimenopause can exacerbate those states. And it is viewed as almost, I'm going to kind of go out on a limb here, but I'm going to say it. It can be viewed as almost like a mental illness. Depression, clinical depression, is frowned upon. It is, you're looked at as like there's something wrong with you. Why can't you snap out of it? Some people will think. And so there's this kind of shroud of negativity around it. And there's definitely a shroud of negativity around menopause. And so women in their 40s, and especially once we move into our 50s, almost have like these strikes against us. And so back to my point about depression or feeling down, if you admit to suffering from or talk about dealing with this down sort of emotional state, you're somehow tainted in a way. And that can be both professionally and personally. And I'm not going to talk so much about the professional side of this. That could be multiple episodes or discussions. Frankly, I have a lot to say about that. But I want to kind of focus this on what is happening, how does this down state manifest, especially during menopause. And then let's talk a little bit about like, how can you help yourself? How can you get help? How can you improve the situation? Okay. So, what is actually going on? There's a chemical imbalance that is happening when we're depressed, or even when you just feel down. Okay, I'm going to kind of use those two things interchangeably and think about this depression on a continuum, and just know that I'm talking about anywhere on this continuum. A lot of this applies. All right, so I'm not just talking about people who are clinically depressed. There's a chemical imbalance that's at play, and that chemical imbalance can be present in the absence of any kind of hormonal fluctuation. So, in other words, we all know that there are people who can be in their, children, teens, 20s. You can be any age and be depressed. And so there be this existence of this chemical imbalance, right? But once we move into this transitional period of perimenopause and menopause, the hormonal imbalances that exist can then exacerbate or even bring the onset of a depressed state for us. So if you've never ever struggled with any kind of down state or depression, when you move into perimenopause, you can all of a sudden, and it's not really all of a sudden, but you know what I mean, you can have depression where you've never dealt with it before. And I think that's almost harder for some people. But again, I digress. I won't go off on that tangent. So, how does it sort of manifest when you're in menopause, perimenopause, and you're dealing with all of these other kinds of side effects, all of these symptoms that start to show: brain fog, night sweats, moodiness, forgetfulness, just, the host of kinds of challenges that we're faced with, then pile on top of that depression. And so what does that look like? Well, here are a number of things that are extremely common and that women experience and that you talk with me about. And some of these I have firsthand experience with dealing with them myself. And I definitely have a lot of experience with helping women in our 12-week program try to address these issues and successfully navigate these challenges so that they can manage them and get beyond them. But here's what some of them look like and how they kind of present themselves. Negative self-talk. That is one of the telltale signs of this kind of down, depressed state. Now, you may be saying, well, I've dealt with that my entire life. You may very well have, but once we move into perimenopause and our hormones start fluctuating and all the other kinds of issues start presenting, negative self-talk can intensify. And it is definitely one of the issues we need to be aware of, because it can manifest into many other, even more complicated and negative issues, right? But it's certainly one of the troubling, more depressive, intensifying kinds of characteristics, if you will. It is definitely one that I have struggled with even before I was in perimenopause. And it is probably one of the most common issues that you tell me that you struggle with. It's, well, I look in the mirror and I think critically about my body. I, think about my job and how things are going, and I'm constantly criticizing myself. It can be a lot of different kinds of negative self-talk, but that is definitely something that increases and intensifies if we are in a down, depressive state, right? Another sort of indication of depression is this idea that you tell me you struggle with all the time. And it is, you might think of it in terms of all or nothing kinds of thinking. It is this absolute thinking that we get ourselves into, where we have this tendency to think of things in black and white. We are doing really well or we're doing horribly, right? We're like very rigid and intolerant. I will say that we're rigid and intolerant of perspectives, and particularly about ourselves. We're much more tolerant of others and other situations and reactions, but we're very rigid in our thinking and our expectations for how we should perform, what we should be capable of doing, and oftentimes doing for others, not necessarily doing for ourselves. But we can't be flexible in our thinking. We're like psychologically and emotionally unable to think outside of these completely all or nothing kinds of ways, right? And so, you'll see this in, sometimes women will tell me how they will decide they're going to go on a diet, and they're dealing with changes in their body, like fat deposits around their middle. They're recognizing that their face has changed. Maybe they're starting to see sort of the appearance of kind of like that jowl-like look in their face. They're noticing more fine lines. They're feeling, more squishy in their body. Oftentimes you'll also tell me that you just don't feel as attractive. You're like, I notice, and this is going to, well, I'm just going to say it. So a lot of times you will tell me that you knew that when you were younger, men noticed you. And now you feel like you just kind of fade into the background, that people don't pay attention to you as much, that people kind of look at you like you don't exist, if you will. And you start to feel like you don't matter as much. And again, I think part of that, from what you tell me, part of that is initiated by this perception that you have that your physical body has changed. And it's not just a perception. That's not really fair. We have changed. Our body has changed. And so you begin to become more aware of that physically, and then it kind of manifests into this emotional and psychological feeling like you're not as viable, you're not as even sexual. I think there's a component to that. You just don't feel like you matter as much. And so it kind of maximizes in this way that you start to feel kind of down about yourself physically. And then that in turn becomes this emotional kind of downness. Like I don't matter as much at my work. I don't matter as much in terms of the roles that I fulfill as a female, personally and professionally. And so it all kind of snowballs into you feeling worse about yourself. I cannot tell you how often I have this conversation, this very conversation with women. And you expect that you won't feel this way. You expect more of yourself. You have the standard for what you should think and how you should perform and who you should be. And you're so completely inflexible in that thinking about yourself that you're unable to see outside those black and whites. I hope that's making sense. So all of that makes the physical components of going through menopause even more heightened. You're even more sensitive to them in a negative way. You feel even worse about them. And I think part of what we need to recognize is that's why I really believe that what I do, for example, with the women in our 12-week program, it is, and I say this over and over, you've heard me say it on social media, you've heard me say it on episodes of this podcast, but what I do is not just about food and fitness. It's not just about weight loss. It is not just about this physical change, but it is truly about a complete transformation. I'm not a weight loss coach. A lot of people look at me as that, and they come to me for help with weight loss. But when we start to talk, what you truly want is a complete overhaul of your life at this point. So many things have changed. Your physical has changed. Your position in your career has changed. Your role as a mom and a wife has changed. And you know that you're at this space where you're on the cusp of like everything evolving. And so truly, that's why what I do is more of a transformation. I am a transformational coach more so than I'm a weight loss coach, because all of this really goes hand in hand. And I go on a tangent there but I think that base level understanding is important, because so often I talk to you guys here in these spaces, right? And in my total wellness group, I talk to women there like on the whole, right? I just recently, for example, did a banish the bloat challenge, and we were focused on making changes that would get you some quick wins. And work on the inflammation in your body and debloat your body. And that is great. And I do that a lot. I did trainings during that challenge. And I talked to that 5,000 plus women in that group in those challenges almost daily. But the reality is that when we talk one-on-one, when you schedule a discovery or a strategy call with me, and we really start digging into what it is that you want in terms of change in your life, we really uncover that the weight loss, more energy, more confidence, all of those things are just part and parcel of the actual result that you're looking for. And that is, you're looking for a true internal and external transformation. That's how I know that you're a really good fit for the coaching that I do, because the coaching that I do is transformational coaching. It's not just a physical change that I help you affect. It is truly an identity change. And it comes at a time when our lives are changing completely. Our roles are changing. Our kids are getting older and they need us in different ways. It's not that they don't need us anymore, but they need us in different ways. Our relationship is evolving. Perhaps many of you, like I have experienced, you're becoming empty nesters. And so there's a switch in what that means for you as parents. If you are married and the two of you are raising kids, sometimes people are their careers are changing. Sometimes, you're looking toward retirement, you're looking toward selling a home and downsizing. There's like all this change that's going on, and at the same time our physical bodies are changing with menopause. And so it's about excuse me, it's about a discussion about how do I manage the physical, the role changing, the emotional transformation, that how do I put all of that together in a way that I can step into this like next stage of my life and be better and feel better. But I hope I'm kind of rambling here, but I hope what I'm what I'm emphasizing is that this is an all-encompassing kind of evolution at this stage in life. And so back to this idea of, well, that it becomes much more difficult if you're feeling down or you're depressed. So how do we then help kind of manage that depression? Well, here are a few things that I don't really talk a lot about, but I work with women in our 12-week MRS program, right along with helping you with the nutrition that you need and helping you to manage, hormones and menopause, with getting fitter and feeling, more toned. Like, what else is going on? Well, I do help you with this emotional and psychological shift that is occurring. And here are some of the ways that I do that. One is it's about a mindfulness. It's an awareness of what is happening. It's an acceptance and an acknowledgement that this is a reality, and it is not in your imagination. It's not an acceptance in the sense of like, oh, well, that's the way it is and I just have to accept it. It's more of an awareness of the fact that I do have these emotions. I am in this kind of position, if you will, based on very scientifically sound reasons that this is happening to me. But I also have to accept and acknowledge that I play a role in this. And that's part of what we work on, right? And so you have to say, okay, yeah, if I want to change, I've got to accept some responsibility for my part in this. And so we work through things like that inflexibility of your thought, that rigidity that is in there, that is holding you back, that is keeping you feel stuck? What does that look like? How do I become aware of that and then implement change in a way that I can be more flexible in my thinking? I can be open to alternatives. I can let go of the black and white. I can accept that there's gray. I can be more flexible. I keep coming back to that word because it's so important that we own that. And oftentimes, I think where we struggle is that we are so successful in so many areas of our lives that we cling to this idea that we are right. We are right about things, and we have evidence of that in so many ways in our lives, right? Like, you're a leader at work, and so you are the one who people go to for the right answers. You are a trusted advisor from your to your friends. Your friends come to you for advice. And so we kind of that kind of reinforces that sense of like we have the answer, and thinking that we have the answer to everything almost reinforces that inflexibility, that unwillingness to change. And what I work with women on, and I think is one of the really important things that you've got to be aware of so that you can be open to how you can help your own depressed state, is you've got to open yourself up to mindfulness. You've got to be aware that inflexibility is not helping you. It is only going to keep you feeling stuck, particularly at this stage in life. So rather than kind of digging your heels in and that sense of like I'm right and I don't have to change being reinforced, think about like, what would it look like for me to explore other options in my life, for me to choose to be more flexible and open to different ways of thinking about this, right? And I want to make sure that I am acknowledging as we talk about this that having all of these emotions, it's completely normal. And one of the things I wanted to accomplish by recording this episode is that it's not only normal, but it's kind of hidden away. And so I wanted to bring it to the surface so that you can expect it and you can embrace that this is a reality for many of us. When we go into perimenopause, it's not going to be just about our periods going away. It's not going to be just about us gaining weight about around the middle that we're going to have to attend to. It's not going to be just about, the struggle with night sweats and brain fog. But we can expect and acknowledge that feeling down is a normal part of this too. But with that, we can choose not to stay there because it really is a choice. And I think one of the things that women do when they come into our 12-week program is they are acknowledging that that is a possibility, but they don't know how to move forward themselves. And that I want to honor, and I want to give accolades to every woman who has decided to work with us on this transformational journey, because it's difficult to acknowledge that you can't change something by yourself. It is admirable to say, you know what, these are the facts and this is the situation that I'm in and I need help to get out of it. All right. And that's what I'm encouraging you to do, is be aware, but know that you can choose to move beyond it. You are not stuck. It is overcomable. It is figure outable, right? If those are words. And so another way that I think is really effective in moving beyond this is having the awareness and then, becoming mindful and making the choice to change. But almost deeper than that is identifying, okay, and having a very honest conversation with yourself or someone like me, about what are your core values, and acknowledging that part of what you're struggling with is that you're very rigid in those values. And we're at a place in life where you need to, part of being mindful is acknowledging that your core values may very well be changing. The things that you wholeheartedly believed in, they were at the center of your purpose and your identity, as you are moving into this next stage of life, it's okay that they change. That's a hard one for us to come to grips to, because we're so entrenched in those values that they've become identity markers for who we are. It is who we are. And we think that there's something inherently wrong with wanting to shift. And I will say this, we can change our minds. And that seems so simple, but it is a rock that people will cling to. That because you believed in something, but because it was, at the core of your core, that it just has to always be that way. And I'm here to tell you that if, as you move into and through this stage of life, your core values will undoubtedly change. You need to embrace the fact that that is okay. But you need to explore what that means for how you move about your day to day, how you move about your life, the decisions that you make. Because part of how you help that depression is identifying or re-identifying those core values, and then figuring out what actions and behaviors and what discipline you have developed that continue to align with those new core values, and which ones don't align anymore. And how does that affect change in your day-to-day life? Those are the real, hard kinds of discussions that we have. And so, yeah, it starts with because your hormones are changing, some things are, decreasing, some things are fluctuating, you're expecting that kind of physical stuff. But we start seeing evidence of these other things in our lives, and we're not sure how to explain it away. And because we're so successful and we're analytical and we can logically think through to the next step, we have a difficult time dealing with these things that feel so non-analytical, so non-logical, right? And we begin to fall into I think this pit. And this is what I see with a lot of women when they come to me for help. They fall into this pit of expecting the negative or the bad, right? And so we start seeing evidence of that in our lives, and then we try to cling to what we already knew or what we thought or how we felt and what we believed from the past, and we just kind of spiraled into this difficult and even more complex position that we're in. And it starts to impact our performance at work. It starts to impact our friendships, our relationships with family, our relationships with our intimate partner. And most importantly, I think it starts to impact our relationship with ourself. And so then it's like, okay, I just throw my hands up. This is kind of the response that I see sometimes, is I just throw my hands up, and this is just the way it is. I've just got to accept that getting older and becoming a 50-something-year-old woman means that I don't really hold a valuable place in the world, in my workplace, with my family anymore. And so I don't hold a valuable place to myself. And that's just not That is not the path that you have to choose. And I picked this depression to talk about today because I think that's almost like the trigger. If you go down that path of being depressed and you don't get help with that in a transformational way, all these other things just compound. And it's okay to acknowledge that there's an emotional and psychological part of this journey, and depression is a really common outcome when we don't have help. And so I just submit that to you, you guys today. It's one of those things that I don't want it to sound like it's like this kind of woo out there and intangible. There are some very real strategies. I've shared some of them with you, but getting down to the nitty-gritty of the fact that this is part of this transition, it is a reality, and it is something that we don't have to accept that we can change, is really what I wanted to convey. And so I hope that this episode was at least something that you can resonate with, in the sense that, like, okay, I'm not crazy. It's okay that I'm having these feelings, but there is a way through this. And if you don't reach out to me, reach out to someone, at least to have a discussion about it, and know that there are strategies for, like I said, moving through and beyond it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. It was kind of a different sort of episode today, and I hope it was helpful. So thanks for being here, and I'll meet you right back here next time.